Harris is touting her conservative support, campaigning with Liz Cheney in 3 of the states I mentioned, PA, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
Well, I think that in this election, and especially here in Pennsylvania, we have the opportunity to tell the whole world who we are. And we have the chance to say, you know, we're going to reject cruelty. We're going to reject the kind of vile vitriol that we've seen from Donald Trump.
I have said many times publicly, and I'll say it again, in many, many ways, Donald Trump is an unserious man. But the consequences of him being president of the United States are brutally serious.
That's the tag team closing. They also hammered the high stakes.
I know how quickly democracies can unravel. And I know that as Americans, we can become accustomed to thinking, well, we don't have to worry about that here. But I tell you, again, as someone who has seen firsthand how quickly it can happen, that is what's on the ballot.
We have in our grasp the ability to determine the course of our country. You know, every election we've said this is the one. This is the one. This truly is the one.
This is the one. And you can see we've actually heard both candidates talk about that. Both sides talk about this is so important. And hey, I know you've heard of that before, but it really is. The reasons they share, of course, are different. Now, Trump has had a far longer period of time to build his team and ground game. He's been more or less running for years since he lost his campaign in 20 and also lost an effort to steal it through the disruption of the peaceful transfer of power. So in that sense, he's got a lead on time. But Harris has a huge lead on the money game. Now, she's been raising money for a much shorter amount of time, but she's set records now for the biggest fundraising quarter ever, as the Times reports there. This quarter, as you see, raised $1 billion. That is just bananas. It speaks both to the unusual nature of her candidacy starting late, but there are plenty of late starters who wouldn't raise that kind of money. So it also shows an incredible unifying and enthusiastic mood across the Democratic Party, from grassroots donors to the big rich ones. Harris is getting a boost from big figures like Stevie Wonder in Georgia and Usher, coming off the Super Bowl, which is a reminder of his reach. Nobody does the Super Bowl halftime show without having huge reach in and beyond the U.S. He is helping her out in Atlanta, while Lizzo backs Harris in her native Detroit.
I'm proud to say that I voted early, and I voted for Kamala Harris.
We have the opportunity to choose a new generation of leadership for our country.
They say if Kamala wins, then the whole country will be like Detroit. Okay? Proud like Detroit. Resilient like Detroit.
We got work to do, Atlanta. ATL, we got work to do.
We're talking about the same Detroit that innovated the auto industry and the music industry. So put some respect on Detroit's name.
We ready.
That's some of the energy there, and we've seen some major figures coming out, as you see here in the home stretch, from the big stars to the star of the party, Barack Obama. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has shown more erratic signs in his behavior. He's gone on bizarre tangents. He has, of course, done some things that are quite serious, with the authoritarian threats to abuse power against his opponents, against American citizens. He just says it out loud in public. And then things that are just strange. Trump spent over 10 minutes, it was counted, at a rally over the weekend discussing the golfer Arnold Palmer's genitals. It is the kind of oddity that is strange to discuss. If you heard about it or saw that rally and were talking to anyone about it in your life, at work or at home, you'd struggle to even describe it. But it could be misleading to just skip or over-minimize what is happening. You could imagine if Joe Biden did such a 10-minute rant. NPR referred to the discussion of the golfing legend's, quote, manhood. Trump also used an obscenity to attack Harris, repeated the authoritarian language as I mentioned, casting American citizens as, quote, enemies. So we have the combination here of the Baroque and obscure, what Tim Walz calls weird, and the deadly serious. No one knows what's going to happen over these next 15 days and election night, but I can guarantee you one thing. if Donald Trump wins, he and his allies will point exactly to the things he's been saying over this weekend and the last few months as a kind of public justification or acceptance. Not that these were overwrought pieces of rhetoric or jokes. No, they'll say, he told you he was going to do this, and he won, and now he's going to do it. And no one can say they weren't told in advance. Now, even in that context, there are top Republicans who've openly defended Trump's efforts to do all sorts of bad things, including break the law and steal election, who draw a line at Mussolini. They don't join in and say American citizens are enemies who should be fought with violence, like other actual foreign enemies in, say, North Korea or Russia, where we have a ground war that we're partly supporting. They don't go that far. But they won't honestly face what Trump said. Here is Speaker Mike Johnson lying, claiming that the enemy comment was only about, say, foreigners, not Americans, when Trump literally name-checked American lawmakers like Pelosi. And that's what makes this a lie. DOA.
That's not what he's talking about there. What he's talking about is marauding gangs of dangerous, violent people who are destroying public property.
We have a lot of bad people. But when you look at Shifty Schiff and some of the others, yeah, they are, to me, the enemy from within. I think Nancy Pelosi is an enemy from within.
There it is. How do you know what Trump means? Because he tells you what he means and he repeats it. And Speaker Johnson, who previously has been on this program and is welcome to come back, is lying. Full stop. Kamala Harris is speaking on Trump's erratic behavior, too.
When he does answer a question or speak at a rally, have you noticed he tends to go off script and ramble? And generally, for the life of him, cannot finish a thought. And he has called it the weave. But I think we here will call it nonsense.
Now, Harris has found better ways to deal with this, not the overreacting, pearl clutching, but still exposing it, still knowing that these are weaknesses for him, and often using what we saw there, a kind of a mocking joy mixed with what I also showed you tonight, which is her very serious warnings about the serious stuff. In any normal time, a person doing what Donald Trump is doing in public would be a very target-rich candidate indeed. But these are not normal times, in part because of him and in part because of larger factors we've explored. And so the question for the Democrats in the home stretch is, with so many targets, which are the best to focus on? And for Donald Trump, his aides are basically in a back and forth with him about whether to talk about someone's genitalia for 10 minutes or 8 minutes or 6 minutes. What's the right amount of time? How can you talk the boss out of at least going on so long like that? And how many times should he repeat, even when coaxed otherwise by his Fox News allies? No, he really means it. He means dictator. He means American enemies. He means abuse of power.
Well, I'm first of all going to say you're exactly right. Trump goes out and he says, I'm going to use the military to arrest my political enemies. Then the Mike Johnsons and the Lindsey Grahams and the Wall Street Journal, they just, oh, no, that's not what he really meant. Then he comes back and he says, yeah, that's exactly what I really meant. And you know what's going to happen? You correctly pointed it out. If he wins, he's going to say, I told people I was going to do this. I have the legitimacy of an election behind me. And you know what? He will have a point. Because if I do 5 interviews a day and answer 20 questions, 18 of them are going to be about polling. We've become a nation of polling analysts. And my point is, it's 48-48. He says, I'm going to get rid of the Constitution. I don't think we should get rid of the Constitution. Why don't you just go out and report what he's saying that he's going to do? And they keep saying he doesn't mean that. And he keeps saying, no, I mean that. I'm saying what I mean. And that point that you made, I think, is spot on. And people say, what's at stake in this election? Okay, the Constitution's at stake. The whole idea of I don't know, what do you call it, a constitutional republic, or, you know, whatever highbrow people call it, the idea that we live under a set of laws is literally at risk, and he's telling you that. And people want to know about weakness among males of color. Okay, you're going to arrest all of it. You don't think you have a stake in this election? Guess what? You're not going to do very well. I'm not going to do well. You're not going to do well. All right? When the paddy wagon comes, you and I are going to be in the back of it bouncing around. And it's not going to be very much fun. And they will tell you, the judge said, I'm sorry, Mr. Melba, I'm sorry, Mr. Carville. Mr. Trump said he was going to get rid of the Constitution. I have no choice but to enforce the democratic norms of this country. Maybe that'll happen. It's not far-fetched.
Well, I'm going to say it as clearly as I can based on the evidence. It's not far-fetched at all because he got so far trying that in first term when he came off as a surprise who lost the actual total vote but won the Electoral College, and there were many more guardrails. But as you say, if people are looking up and all they're hearing about is cross-tab polling analysis, it actually minimizes, it diminishes the stakes, which are what you just said and the evidence I mentioned. He did go after people then. He did abuse foreign policy powers to try to get the Bidens investigated. He didn't succeed. Had he succeeded, there might have been so much smoke around the Biden crime family that you might have had a different nominee. He might not have, been beaten. Biden was obviously the one who emerged out of the Democratic process and then beat him. He went after Comey and McCabe. The number one and number two at the FBI were pursued. They both had tax audits. You think he's stopping at tax audits next time? No. He tried to get John Kerry. He tried to get John Kerry imprisoned. And all through that, there were a lot of guardrails that are diminished. So how do you say that, you talked about messaging, Mr. Messaging, to people who aren't following this as closely?
Say it succinctly, say it repeatedly, say it all the time. Because I think that Harris is going to win. Let me just say that up front. And I'm doubling down on that prediction, but could be wrong. So Trump wins, he does that.